Welcome back, everybody. This is Ayad Boudiab. I'm a senior .NET application developer, and we are continuing our discussion on T-SQL. In the previous video, or a couple of videos, I talked about functions, and we saw the different ways of working with functions. And as you can see in here under programmability, we have the different type of functions that we can work with. And those functions are table-valued functions, return a table, scalar-valued functions that return a scalar value, and the other aggregate and system functions are the ones we've discussed in the previous videos anyway. The thing about functions, though, that they cannot update the schema, right? Or they cannot change the data. It returns for you a certain table or returns for you a certain value, but cannot have side effect on the database. Okay, so for example, if there's other functionality like rand for random number generator and new ID for generating a new ID, they cannot be used within functions because themselves they can have side effect on the database. So functions then return for you some values, but we need more power than that. We need the ability to insert, update, delete data from the database. That's why we use stored procedures. So we create stored procedures, say for example, to insert a new customer into the customer table, or to update the delivery date on certain items within the items table, or for example, to delete certain records that we don't read anymore in the account detail table. So then stored procedures will give us more flexibility, right? And that's the subject for today's discussion and the upcoming videos. Today, I will discuss with you some of the procedures that they are available and how we can work with them and how we can call them. In the next couple of videos, I'll basically create our own procedures and see how they can work and how we can call them as well. So then under stored procedures in here for AdventureWorks, I have multiple stored procedures that they already created for me. I can use those stored procedures to do some to work through some examples. Okay, so let's say for example I want to look at the stored procedure update employee login, the procedure right here. As I explained to you in previous videos, I can right click and do multiple things. I can script it or I can modify it. Let's say I want to script that procedure to create in a new query window. That will give me a window that shows the procedure and in a create state, for example, create procedure and then the procedure name. You see that the skeleton is similar to the functions that we have discussed before. We need to make sure first that we are using AdventureWorks 2012, go to execute the batch, and then we do some settings in here for ANSI nulls and coded identifiers, and then we create our procedure. We create it using the create procedure statement that you see here. You specify the procedure name, in this case with the schema, human resources dot USP update employee login. And by the way, you can prefix it with anything you want, but so in some standards we use USP like you see in here. And then it takes certain parameters. These parameters, the first one is of type int, and then you get hierarchy ID, and then end varchar, and the same thing here, date time. These are the actual parameters that we're passing to this function. We pass some parameters, and in here it says execute as caller. That's just for security permissions, means the caller of the function, which is in this case by default, will need to have permission on the objects used within the procedures. In other words, it needs to have access to the tables in order to do some work on those tables, right? And then in here as defines the actual procedure, and then you get the begin and then the end down here. Okay, and let's not worry right now about what's going on down here. Just let's concentrate on the body. So the set no count on, so it doesn't interrupt all the, because in updates and selects and inserts and all that, we'll get some information back about how many records they were updated and such. We don't want that to interfere, so we set no count on. Then there is an update statement in here. It sets some information based on the entity ID. So then all what this procedure does is take some parameters, does an update to the human resources.employee by setting information based on the business entity ID. As you can see, there is a begin try and try in here. I don't know if you know other programming languages, but in here what we're trying to do is try and catch exceptions. Means let's go ahead and try some code. If something goes wrong, then we'll execute the following statement within the catch. Let's try some statements and then catch any exceptions. I'll dedicate another video to look at exceptions, but in this case, as I just explained, try to update the employee table, and then if you catch any exception, execute the log error. Means log the errors that we found into some type of table, right? Okay, so that's the structure of a store procedure then. Now, this store procedure would try to do some work, right? And then, as I said, it just be able to update some information. And then if something goes wrong, it will catch that exception and nothing will take place. Okay, let's look at another one. Update employee personal info. Let's script that to a new query window. And now I have update employee personal info. Again, as you can see, it has the create procedure, execute as caller, some parameters passed in. Notice the @ sign in front of the parameters, their data type, they're a comma separated list. And as I explained to you before, make sure the data types match what's in the tables before you be able to declare them here. And then as begin and end. Inside the begin, I have update the employee with the following information based on the business entity ID, and then if there are any exceptions, catch them. Okay, so that's how I can structure that store procedure. Now, if I need to call that store procedure, what should I do? Remember the name of the procedure, right? It is human resources .usp update employee personal info. It takes an entity ID, it takes a national ID number, it takes a birth date, marital status, and then gender. Let's scroll down here and do a couple of things. I need to call the procedure, so I need to have the procedure name. Okay, I don't have to have those square brackets right now. So I have the store procedure name, but I need to execute it, right? As I mentioned to you before, there are parameters in there that have to make sense. Okay, let's use some help in here, because notice we are updating what? We are updating the employee table, right? So let's go down here, and then for a minute, let's say select top 10, everything from human resources dot employee, order by 1 descending, which is the ID. That's the first column. I got some data here, right? I got the business entity ID, national ID number, and so on. Okay, that makes sense. It lines up with some of the parameters that I'd like to pass. Let me copy those. These are the parameters for the procedure, and put them right underneath the procedure here for a second. So the first thing that I'm expecting is the business entity ID. Well, let's get up 290. Put in there 290. What comes after that? The national ID number. Okay, Let's pick this one up. For example, this is the national ID number, and this is a string. And then after the national ID number, there's the birth date. Does this person have a birth date? Yes, 1969, 11/25. Let's change that. Let's make it 1969 and then -12/25. Like, let's make his birthday on Christmas. Okay. And then after the birth date comes the marital status. What's his marital status? Married. Okay, let's make him single this time. And then the other item is the gender. He's male. Okay. So now I have listed the parameters. I have listed the business entity ID, the national ID number, the birth date, right? The marital status, and the gender. These are the parameters that I need for this procedure. Let's remove this. These parameters are being passed to the store procedure. And then what else do I need? So I use the store procedure name, right, the full name, and then I made sure that I match the parameters that I need. These parameters are passed to the procedure. The procedure supposedly should update that person with the information that you see here based on the business entity ID. Okay? But one thing that I just need to make sure I do is to execute the store procedure, you need to use the execute command. So you just say execute and then the store procedure name. Or you can use the abbreviated version of this by saying exec. Okay? Exec or execute would do the job. So let's highlight this line and let's run it. It says command executed successfully. Okay, let's go ahead and select those top 10%. And let's see what we have here. 290. And this person, okay, we updated his birth date to be on Christmas, and also we made him single. So the update statement has executed, and now we have the store procedure being called to do the work. So that's how I can call a store procedure, using exec or execute, the full name of the store procedure, followed by the appropriate parameters that you need to make sure that they match in terms of parameters so you can call the store procedure correctly. One more thing. Let's look at update employee hire info. That's another store procedure here, the hire info. Let's script that to a new query window and look at the store procedure. You notice again, we still have this create procedure, pass in parameters, comma separated list, execute as caller like you've seen, and then you get the begin and end. You get the begin try. Inside that I have a transaction that's starting. You know that transactions, which is if I have a list of items that need to be done, it's either they are all done or all not done. I cannot be halfway through. I cannot update a certain table but not update the other. It's the whole transaction be satisfied and completed or none, which means I either commit or I roll back. So in this case, we're starting a new transaction and then we're trying to update the employee table with the following information based on the business entity ID. After we're done with that, we're going to insert into the employee pay history with the following information: business entity ID, rate change, rate, and pay frequency. Now that everything got done here, nothing went wrong, I commit the transaction that I started here. But if I entered the begin catch, which is the only time I enter begin catch, is if something went wrong. Otherwise, this does not get executed. If something went wrong, I get into the catch block. The catch block with a begin end in here says if the transaction count is greater than 0, means there is still a transaction going, make sure you roll it back because something went wrong. I don't want to commit. I want to roll back the transaction. Roll back the transaction, log the error. That's how we have done this in the other store procedure as well. Okay, now let's say I want to call this store procedure and execute it like we've done with the other ones. Let's see what we have so far. Let me copy a couple of statements here. I'm going to get everything from human resources.employee like I've done before. And then I'm going to get some information from the employee history. Right now, I have the following information, right? Like you've seen in the previous store procedure. And in here I have the employee pay history where the business entity ID is 290. I'm going to execute that, and you notice I have 2 records. Okay, now I need to call this store procedure. What does this procedure take as parameters? Business entity ID, we can use 290 like we've done here. Job title, I can copy one of those jobs, and then his hire date, when we change the rate, what rate it is, the pay frequency, once or twice, and then the current flag being 1 or 0. Let me copy this and I show you how we can call this store procedure so you don't have to see me typing the whole thing. Let's go down to the bottom and then try to call that store procedure. We notice we use exec, or as I told you before, execute. They both do the same job. And then I have the full name of the store procedure. Okay, no surprises there. 290 for the business entity ID. And then it takes a second parameter as the job title and then the hire date. The job title is European Sales Manager. And then the hire date is 2006-9-10. That's when he was hired. And then after the hire date comes the rate change date and the rate and then the pay frequency. So we get the rate change date and then the rate, then the pay frequency being once, and then the flag that we have as last parameter. Notice in here, instead of passing the value directly, I declare a variable called myRate, and I set that to 1650, and then I added that myRate down here as a parameter. Now, if I highlight the whole thing and execute it, it says command executed successfully. Well, notice it updates the employee table, but it inserts into the employee pay history based on that 290 that we passed in. Okay, let's go ahead and select the information from the employee pay history. And let's look at that. You notice that a new one has been added, 290. Rate change date was 6/15. Modified date was today, 6/26. And then pay frequency is 1, and the rate is 1650. That's the rate that I use over here. So I can see that the procedure has executed successfully. So this is how we can work with those procedures. As you notice, we can have much more power than we had with functions. And then in the next video, I'm going to create a simple table and then create our own procedures to do some work. And then we'll call those procedures like we've done here, so we can have more experience with those procedures so you can create your own. I hope this discussion has been helpful to you. Please stay tuned. We have more upcoming videos on procedures. Thank you very much for listening, and you take care.